You're at work when ICE agents walk in, asking for someone by name. Do you pretend not to hear the ICE agents? Do you warn your coworker and give them time to leave out of the back door? Do you stall the agents? You're leaving a bar when you see someone harassing a trans person. Do you walk away? Do you intervene with the tools or the people that are with you? Do you check in on the person that's being harassed? Every day we face choices that test our values. This is because resistance isn't a moment. It's a muscle that we exercise again and again and again. Anarchist calisthenics are the small daily acts of disobedience that prepare us for something bigger. Because resistance isn't just a stop sign. It's a continuum that takes us from individual acts of defiance to collective modes of liberation and resistance. So again, I ask, what would you do? Our overwhelm with the world that we live in, with Trump getting into office, tens of thousands of federal employees being laid off, of all these plane crashes, of the environmental collapse, of inevitable economic collapse, of the anti-trans violence that is very real, very, very real and happening right now. We can look at our lives as we've always been preparing to be complicit, or we can try to look back and detect the moments where we broke the rules. We have autonomy. And if we don't have autonomy, we can fight towards a moment where we get autonomy. Our individual grief should not shut us off from both liberating ourselves and liberating those around us. Because if you listen to the scenarios that I read at the beginning, a lot of those are scary. But a lot of those are also scenarios that if you tell yourself you're willing to intervene, how would you do it? What tools would you need to have? Will you be with other people? What is your plan of action? And this is where anarchist calisthenics comes into play.
Hey! Why are you running? Why are you running? Now that you have seen me, man, do your worst.
Anarchist calisthenics is a concept by James C. Scott, and it says that everyday acts of resistance prepare us for larger defiance. And this matters because radical change isn't just in the big moments, the spectacles, the protest. It's in how you prepare for those moments. I was listing concepts that really symbolize anarchist calisthenics to me, and the first one is queerness as resistance. Being a young kid in the 2000s, all of the weird fucking TV and media about toxic masculinity, hypermasculinity, and how as I was learning to accept myself, a lot of the unlearning that I was doing was the lessons about gender that people had given me, the jokes that people made in my class. When you learn that you are something that deviates from the mainstream or from the status quo, there is this moment where you think, do I live my life for the acceptance or the approval of other people, or do I live my life for myself? Do I become someone else's definition of good, or do I figure out what goodness is to me, or do I find the value of defiance? And queerness very quickly taught me the power of that lesson, even as early as 11 or 12, even if that lesson was like growing inside of me. Studying queer history, understanding the ways that other people felt about it, and finding lines of emotional defense when I was with other people in school that would make anti-queer or homophobic jokes, or with my family. Coming out when I was 15, 16 was really the first time in my life where I started to challenge authority. I started to challenge the authority of my parents, of my culture, of my racial background, to say, I deserve to exist, and I'm gay, and I'm going to find ways to be happy and an alive person despite the shadow of doubt hanging over me. It's important for us to define ourselves in a world that is constantly trying to define us. The question of authority, of being a citizen, of being a human being, all of those are definitions derived to us by a government, a state, a culture that we've been born into. And these modes of operating in a world can be resisted. And those forms of resistance can lead us to deeper joys. If I had questioned all of those values that I'd been given when I was younger, it might have taken me longer to come out. It might have taken me longer to fall in love, to have many of the experiences in my 20s that helped shape the kind of queer person that I am. And allowing other people to define you isn't going to help you figure out what your specific mode of resistance is. And this can come in many different forms. What is your ideology? What is your approach to a revolutionary process? What are you passionate about that you can really step into and be a part of a collective. Another example of anarchist calisthenics that I have in my life is cheat more, cheat and slack off at school. Smart. Growing up, I was trained in thinking that I need to be the right kind of student. I need to go to college. I need to speak a certain way and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I grew up inner city, black neighborhoods, poor communities, and college and the idea of college and STEM was such a big part of how so many older people train you that getting out of the hood is possible. And I remember I went to college. I was on mostly scholarships. So it was my first time that I was in a school where I didn't have to show my grades to a parent or anything. And I think about 2 years into college, I was like, this is a lot of fucking work. And a lot of this work is fucking ridiculous. Having to go to all these English classes, read all these books. And to me, it was just a lot of the stuff they wanted me to read. I was just like, I don't want to read more dead white men. And what kind of calmed that tension, that chaos, is I started to slack off. I started to skip some classes. I started to organize off campus. I started to skip classes to go to organizing meetings. I started to figure out how to charm my way around not having read a full text and showing up to class and still participating, learning how to be charismatic towards my teachers. The biggest thing that I did that I'll mention is instead of reading the entire books in college, I would read the Amazon reviews, take notes off of that, use those notes to be the basis for how I'd respond in class. And also, like, of course, skim the text for when I needed to write a paper or something. Hack the system. Universities are raising their tuition prices every year. They're invested in sports and STEM and militarism, depending on the university that you're in, because the universities, especially public universities, are now just a business model. If you are being exploited by a business, you deserve to take some resources back. And if one of those resources is your time, figure out how you can get your time back. Figure out how to do your work more effectively. Figure out how to not follow the rules that lead you to doing all this fucking work and paying all this money when you don't even have time for yourself. Some of the most inspiring educational learning moments, most of them were not in the classroom. Most of them were at bars or at poetry nights or at protests or at political meetings. And my resistance to traditional education and the authority that a professor could have and droning on and articulating a certain kind of history related to literature when I'd experienced this whole other history and way of entering literature, it taught me we should never let other people define how we learn. We have to discover our process of learning for ourselves, whether that be an individual educational plan, whether that be slacking off while you're at an institution that slacking off is possible, whether that be doing your own learning outside of the classroom and being committed to that. And doing all of that in university, I really think pushed me into this mode of not only learning for the sake of a degree, but entering organizing and activism as I was leaving university and knowing that there was this whole history that I needed to tap into. Learning at that point became a part of how I wanted to be a more radical and revolutionary person. Understanding that there were histories of resistance, there were Black histories of resistance, of struggle, of militaristic action that I could really understand and see that I was a continuum of. And when we begin to question one mode of learning, typically or ideally, it leads us to this journey and process of figuring out what are the ways that I specifically like to learn, and how is this particular institution in disservice to that? How is this particular institution defending their bottom line instead of worrying about the actual educational process? Why believe the myth that universities are these genuine institutions of learning when the actual truth tells us that they are institutions of profit? And if we believe in the illusory idea of the university and that creates a certain kind of status quo that isn't proven by reality, what are the ways that we can resist that system? What are the ways that we can hack it? Keyword is smart. Because I've actually been a professor for do it a little different, and maybe things will work out for you. Maybe things will work out for you. If it's AI, maybe don't use it, because actually it's really fucking bad for the environment. Or at least ChatGPT is. I haven't done much research into other AIs. Labor is one of the biggest sites of resistance.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay colors enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog, day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch.
When I was living in Seattle in 2016, I had a boycott organizing job. The job was fucking intense. Like, I was learning how to like yell at people outside of stores. I was researching all these random organizations, calling people, basically trying to get them to pressure their organization not to stay at hotels that were under labor disputes. I was given random directives. I didn't really have a say in the campaigns or the research that I was doing. The meetings that we had to do were boring. When we had to travel for work, you didn't really have much say in that. If your hours were going to change drastically because it was salary, I also didn't have any say in that either. And I think the more and more I dug into that job, the more I thought it was ridiculous. Like, I'm advocating for other people's labor rights, yet I'm in a workplace where I'm new, I'm one of the only Black people. I feel like things could be better, or there could be a more democratic way of us doing these things. And this was all up against the structure, the hierarchy of a union, the ways that you show up to a meeting, and the lead organizer has gotten directives from the labor head or whatever the fuck you call it. And I started to really look at this workplace as a site of hierarchy and authority when I began to recognize that, just like I'd recognized it at school, just like I'd recognized it in my family life and in the social structures that I'd grown up in. I saw this job as another place of I don't even want to say coercion, but coercion. Having to believe someone else's idea about something and letting something happen because on some level, it benefiting them also benefits you. That's what I mean when I say coercion. I started to slack off. I started to fib on some of my paperwork. I started to make my calls, but I started to research other things. I started applying for other jobs when I was at that job. And eventually, I did get fired. For my anarchist journey is quit your fucking job. Quit your fucking job. I mean, there are so many times where I've quit my job or I've been fired and I've been fucking glad for it. And this is with the sort of disclaimer or the context of do what you have to do to survive. If you have responsibilities, if you have bills, if you don't want to end up in certain situations where your job can help you avoid being in a fucked up situation, don't quit your job. But the other side of it is quit your job. When I was in college, I had a job for 3 months one summer where I was a personal assistant to this like retired professor. Old man, hard of hearing, all these other things. I was helping him like digitize things and do his citation pages or whatever. He was fucking horrible. He was mean. He farted all the time. He was mean. He just talked down to you. And I remember one day he spoke at me sideways in this real particular way. I snapped. I called him a dirty old man. I quit. I ended up working a housekeeping job in Montana. As a housekeeper, I'm probably one of those people that if you watch like 2020 and they investigate rooms and they shine the light on the beds and they see like common stuff everywhere, I was probably the housekeeper that went through that room. I used toilet paper to wipe up the bathtub and make sure there wasn't like any visible specks. I would, depending on what the sheets looked like, I wouldn't change the sheets. There were so many little hacks that I had to get through a room in 30 minutes as opposed to 45 or 60 minutes, or in 15 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes. Because if you have a list of rooms that you have to do for that day and you have turnovers or check-ins on rooms, you want to be quick. I got another paid organizing job during the 2016 election. I was a lead organizer. So I was leading like a team of like 4 or 5 people. And our jobs were basically oscillated between going out and getting signatures for people that wanted to vote responsibly for the environment or doing phone banking. In the beginning, this job would kind of let you do these things, not at your leisure, but there were set times a day. And if you worked through your list, and it was pretty effective. Like you could kind of work through things at your own pace. Closer to the election, they started automating the phone banking system and they made us go out and canvass way more. And they wanted us to get all these fucking signatures. What would I do? I would have my organizers phone bank at my house, give them pizza. I would say, hey, bring some beers or water or soda if you want. Let's hang out and make this a more fun process. When we had to canvass and get signatures from people, I remember one time we went to the fair. I was like, we're going to get signatures at the fair. And then we got to the fair and they were like, okay, what side of the fair do you have? And blah, blah, blah. And they were trying to like orchestrate, but the organizers were trying to orchestrate. And I was like, listen, I'm your boss. And I'm telling you, ride 2 rides. This wristband is unlimited. Ride 2 rides. And then we're going to sit down and fill out these forms. Finding these loopholes to buy you back your time, to teach other people that they don't have to follow the rules as easily. All of these are important things to do, to intervene, to exhibit towards other people, especially in workplaces. And you want to do this smart, of course. You want to do it effectively. You don't want to do it in a way or around somebody that's going to snitch on you. And you can't always tell who that person is. But buy your time back. Buy your time back. And mind you, for that job, I slacked off as much as I could, and then they still kept ringing us out for more work. And eventually I quit, like on a random day where me and my coworker were supposed to like work and our boss wasn't going to be there. And we were like, oh my God, we're going to go to a cafe. We're going to get work done, but we're going to go to a cafe. We're going to chill. We're going to get lunch. My boss ended up texted us and said, oh, I'm coming back into the office. And me and my friend looked at each other. And they were like, do you want to quit? And I was like, yeah. We went back to the office, dropped off all our shit, and a week later, we were in Standing Rock. This whole concept of anarchist calisthenics can seem really individualized. It can seem like this sort of, oh, I don't wear shoes, so I'm practicing anarchist calisthenics, or I don't own a car, so I'm practicing anarchist calisthenics. And I think everyone deserves to define it for themselves. But in my mind, the most effective and revolutionary form of anarchist calisthenics, the one that can help us get into the community, help us build trust with people, that can help us intervene when crisis happens or outside of moments of explicit crisis. It's when anarchist calisthenics goes from the individualism of buying our time back to having the capacity to inspire others to break rules, having the capacity to compel others to break rules, having the capacity to defend each other as we break rules. And this is why I think anarchist calisthenics is such an interesting and necessary mode of thought. And I hope these examples kind of ground you all in the fact that in these different places in your life, in your family systems, with your friends, at work, at school, when you are entering an institution, whether social or economic, that has predetermined rules, question those rules. Wild to think about, because I'm like, our government is practicing anarchist calisthenics. I'm joking. But I do think people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, they literally believe in manifest destiny, and they're depending upon our compliance every single fucking day to be able to do what they want to do. And we start resisting piece by piece. If you are at a family dinner and your family's being transphobic, how do you call your family members out and stand up for a marginalized community? And how can this help lead to maybe you stepping in when you see someone harassing a trans person outside of a bar? Individual acts of resistance, of challenging the status quo, can help prepare us for a future where we will have to take care of ourselves, where we will have to take care of each other, where we will have to rise, to the occasion, to be more empathetic, to be more daring, to be more courageous. It isn't just a one-time thing. It's something that you practice again and again and again over time. Because I've told myself since I was young, I'm like, if I'm in a bar and I see a guy treating a girl like shit, I'm going to step in. I'm not going to win the fight if a fight happens, but I'm going to step in. And that's just something I've told myself. It's a preparation because that matters to me. And it's important for each of us to understand the things that we're passionate enough about to intervene on and to begin to intervene. So thank you for watching this video. Like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to support this channel, go to my Patreon. And remember, we learn the power of defining ourselves for ourselves. We learn to cheat a system that cheats us, as many poor people have already done. And capitalism is bullshit, so we should resist it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video on anarchist calisthenics. I have been editing a new episode in the Direct Action 101 series, and it's been a fucking struggle. I had to sit down for so many hours because my camera kept dying. And the editing, there's always a learning curve when you're learning how to edit and do video. But I wanted to give y'all a special preview at the end of this video. And if you want to get a longer preview of this or early access, head to my Patreon and become a paid member. But thank you again. I really appreciate folks watching my channel, engaging with the ideas that I talk about. I think frameworks that help us be more radical are important. And they're important because they help us be more radical. So stay woke and cheat more. In the early 1980s, the government watched as a virus tore through communities, especially LGBTQIA ones, and did nothing. By 1987, thousands upon thousands were gone, and the president wouldn't even acknowledge the crisis. Hospitals turned patients away, and families turned their backs. The state failed us. What happens when the state ignores its people? What happens when the systems that are supposed to protect you abandon you instead? What do you do when people are dying and no one is stepping in to help? But we did act up, and other organizations took the streets, demanding actions. Communities formed mutual aid networks to care for the sick, provide food, and push for treatment. We didn't wait for permission. We stepped in when no one else could. Now, as the Trump administration guts resources and stokes chaos, we face a similar question. When the state fails, what will you do? Mutual aid saved lives then, and it can save us now. Because when the state abandons us, we react by taking care of each other.
A mystery disease known as the gay plague has become an epidemic unprecedented in the history of American medicine. That today from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, topping the list of likely.
I chose this topic because I think amongst all of the other forms of direct action, it's one of the most tangible ones. It's one of the most accessible ones. And I think it's one of the ones that we see constantly more and more as crisis and environmental collapse and economic disenfranchisement continues in the U.S., whether it be people struggling to pay their bills, struggling to feed their children, struggling to get accessible health care, legal support, so many different things. There are so many gaps and forms of exploitation that exist under capitalism and white supremacy as we know it. And mutual aid is one of those forms of direct action that have really helped humans and marginalized people survive throughout literally probably every instance of history. Mutual aid is not charity. It's a solidarity-based support where everyone gets what they can and takes what they need. And I think it's important to also define mutual aid as both a form of direct action and also an ideological approach. It's kind of important to talk about when mutual aid is direct action and when it is not.